Hello and welcome. I'm Githan Patel and delighted to welcome you to our series on the future of capitalism. As you know, Force for Good looks at the big themes that will affect the flows of capital and how those might go towards creating a more sustainable, inclusive world. And today I'm delighted to welcome Theodor Weimer, who is the CEO of the Deutsche Börse, one of the most important stock exchanges in Europe. From that privileged position, Theodor, of course, sees the huge flows of money and how that is being directed towards some of the biggest issues, challenges, and opportunities in the world. Theodor has a fascinating career, beginning consulting at McKinsey, and then at Bain & Co., where he was a senior partner, at Goldman Sachs, where he was at investment banking and a partner in the business, UniCredit Group in Milan, where he headed markets and investment banking division, BHV, and in the bank, he was the executive chairman of global investment banking. And at Hypo-Währungsbank, UniCredit Bank, he was the spokesman of the management board, member of the executive committee, and member of the business executive committee too. Fascinating and delighted to have you here, Weimer. Thank you.
Hello, welcome. Hi, good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Today, we will talk about capitalism, sustainability, the big challenges facing the world, the policy, inclusive capitalism in the context of a very challenging world scenario, and the need to fund some of these biggest issues, and of course, the opportunities too. Theodor, let me kick off with the first question. Would you mind introducing yourself in terms of the role that you play at the Deutsche Börse today, and explain for those who don't know how significant this Borse is, in particular at this point in time, and the flows of capital and other things that go through the Borse?
Okay, very briefly, what I am the CEO of Deutsche Börse. I'm sitting on top as a member of the supervisory board at the Deutsche Bank, right? And therefore I have a certain spider in the web situation here in Frankfurt, right? At least for this tiny capital market, I see the flows and I see the situation. And as the CEO of the by far largest European stock exchange, I think I have a pretty good feeling where Europe stands and how we are comparatively positioned to other markets. Our market cap is roughly 30 billion euros. We are 4 times bigger than the next biggest one, which is Euronext, positioned in Paris and Amsterdam. We are, at the end of the day, not a financial service company. We are a combination, a hybrid company. We are a hybrid of a tech company and a financial service company. And at the end of the day, we are an operator, right? And we do, on a normal day, we transact roughly 150 million transactions per day. And if there's lots of uncertainty and volatility in the market, like during the Ukraine war or during COVID, it can easily be, it goes up to 600 million transactions per day, right? And so you need to understand, if you want to understand us, we are not, some people are congratulating me when the DAX is on highest level, which is complete nonsense. We are a capital market infrastructure operator. We run various stock exchanges with different brands like Xetra, Eurex. We are the largest power exchange owner in Europe, and we have a foreign exchange and so forth. We own Institutional Shareholder Services, which is the largest proxy advisor. So we are number 3 on ESG data. So what we do, we trade, we clear, and we settle all securities transaction. And increasingly, we want to do the same for all the digital assets.
Theodor, thank you. That's a lot of transactions going through one infrastructure in which I guess you see the flow of capital and the flow of data. And with that, you also see the sensitivity of that to what's happening in the world. And so I'd like to step back with you and ask you to talk about what are the biggest challenges facing the world. And with that, if you wouldn't mind going back first and saying which macro events in history stand out for you through your career.
Right. I think, quite frankly, there's the benefit of being a little bit more seasoned. You have seen more crisis over the time, right? And there's a fascinating situation in the last century, right? Basically, if I recall, I can only recall as a huge crisis which really is on top of my mind is the oil embargo in 1973, and the second one at the end of the 1970s, 79 and 80, which caused huge and heavy recessions. But apart from this, I hadn't seen any huge crisis at all. It was all the whole global economy was going up, right? Societies, we became more and more global. And by the way, many of my friends, right, became more and more wealthy during these days, right? And what happened since 2008, right, it has changed fundamentally, because since 2008, my feeling is, and others have created a word, we are living increasingly in this very famous VUCA world with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I heard it, I didn't believe it at the beginning, and now after some 15 years of basically ongoing crisis, I feel that VUCA is currently getting even bigger and more accelerated. And if I start 2008, the great financial crisis, which that was exactly the time when I became CEO of the third largest bank, right? I know I was working before at Goldman's. It started effectively in 2006 with the mortgage crisis and the famous CDS, the credit default spread issue. It peaked in 2008 during the Lehman crisis, right? And then subsequent, after 2008, we had 2009, the global deep recession. Germany went down by -5%, Europe by -4%. Then we had the Euro crisis in 2010 to 2012. Huge situation, right, with Greece declared that they are unable to repay any payment obligations. Ireland came then. 2011, we had a debt crisis. I know it by heart. 2012, Greece, we had a 22% unemployment rate. 2015, the migration crisis. 2016, we had Brexit. 2020, then, of course, the next big one, Corona. It was the next black swan nobody had ever thought of, right? And then 2022, the war, the aggression of Russia over Ukraine, which was a completely new experience for me, because now we need to face the truth. War is back in Europe. So that is the macro event scenario, and I feel as if the whole system, right, is getting closer and closer to an explosion.
Wow. Now, so you almost said to us, and I think you have, that the world has been rising, and despite the shocks, it just kept rising. And 2008 was a line in the sand. And after 2008, we just have had crisis after crisis after crisis.
Indeed.
And here we are today with the Ukraine war being another big line in the sand, I guess. So what are the biggest challenges you think facing the world? Do you think we're back at a 2008 type event where the next few years potentially will put us deeper into crisis and see something similar to 2008?
Quite frankly, I don't want to come over as too gloomy. I'm a very positive guy per se, but we need to be very intellectually, we need to be honest and sharp. And quite frankly, Ketan, we are in a situation right now, I think it's worse than 2008. It's worse. Why is this the case? We have geopolitically, we have uncertainty, we have a radical tectonic shift, we have a true Cold War. We're in the middle of a true Cold War between the United States and China. China is losing its pragmatism under Xi. We all have seen what happened last Sunday, or whenever it was. We see a potential huge instability in the United States. We know we are exposed to single black swan events like Taiwan, event risks. I tend to call them event risks. We will definitely run into a partial decoupling, which is a huge threat for globalization as such, right? And at the end of the day, autocracy is fighting, right, somehow with democracy, right? And we know the majority of the world in terms of people are living under autocracy regimes, right? We as people living under democracy regimes, we think that we are superior to others. So there's a huge it's a paradigm fight going on, right? Which is very fundamental. We have a paradigm fight also on the shareholder value. We will come to this later on. And therefore, I think the fact that war is again feasible, we need to take this into consideration. And then, of course, we have the climate, right, which is the biggest challenge for the next decades, regardless of all the other challenges I have already discussed. This is an underlying fundamental challenge which will cause both huge migration topic, and the migration topic is a fundamental one because it is A, driven by climate, it is B, driven by the inequality, right, between the countries, right, and then of course we will see inflation forever, indebtedness, big government will ultimately fail, right, and unfortunately, right, we have to see very clearly from an analytic point of view, United States is currently a big winner, and since all the money is there, right, all the flows are there, right, that is a huge issue and obstacle to overcome it, because as long as the United States are winner in a certain overall difficult situation, the biggest elephant in the room is not there to, they do not suffer, they are not in a position, they don't need to change situation, right? That is my read of the challenges.
Interesting. I mean, Theodor, you are pointing to so many interesting factors coming together that shape our world. But you've ended with a very big one. You're saying that the US, as perhaps the architect today of today's capitalist system, is somehow insulated from the pain that the rest of the world feels. Even though, of course, they are going through their own pain. They do have issues to do with inflation, and they are politically divided and so on, as you mentioned. But to some level, they are more insulated than the rest of the world as the architects of the system that see the flows. Is that correct? Have I captured that right in terms of the US?
You did capture it perfectly. My theory is, at the end of the day, right, we are in a situation, we have to sort out the new power equilibrium between the countries of the world. And in my own humble assessment is, we have two countries, it's China and United States. They are in a position to differentiate themselves because of a very clear, highly ambition-orientated, right, government, which comes together with a very strong technology orientation, right? And therefore, they are able to differentiate themselves. And then you've got, these are for me, that's the first class, the first bucket of countries. And then you've got a second buckets. These are the seasoned economies with limited skills and the willingness for renewal, right? I put Germany in this bucket, right? Where social justice is a big topic, where people are talking increasingly about how to distribute value instead of how to create value, right? It's a little bit of good people behavior, right? Of these countries, they can afford it. At the end of the day, right? They are reaping the benefits of former generations, and they're risking the chances of future generations, right? And that's what I see very prominently in Europe, by the way, right? Then you've got the third bucket is given my understanding, these are the emerging markets, right? They are laggards, right? As always, we have. When I was at Goldman's, we talked about BRICS, right? Only China survived. I do not believe that the emerging markets are coming back. They have the, and sometimes they have the raw material, but they are not able to capture the benefits of their sources of wealth, right? And therefore, I am more and more frustrated about the potential of wealth on the emerging markets. And the last bucket for me are the laggards.
The system, if it's to work, the capitalist system, then it has to raise everybody, right? And if it only raises a small proportion, at some stage we will see the migration flows we will see the inequities play out in ways that hamper and impinge on those that are winners in the system. Step back from me, from your role, what do you see as the role of capitalism, the financial system, capital flows? And what should their leaders be doing to make a change?
That's, of course, not a 1 million, it's the $1 billion question, of course. Yes. But what I see is, I think the times where you could positively differentiate yourself as an individual system, right? Saying, this is my own sandbox, I play in the sandbox, and as long as I'm better than the other ones who are playing the same sandbox, these times are over. We have to take into consideration secondary order effects of what we are doing and others are doing. Because what happens, right? If democracy is at risk, if other people are starving, right, to death, if other people don't have access to water, they will come to us, right? And therefore we need to start to think in a much more comprehensive approach, right? Not because we are good people who want to help other people in the laggard countries, as I call them, right? It is in our own interest. Yeah, it's at our own benefit that we are helping them. And our guys, our people, right, our governments, our elite and our leaders, we need to understand for ourselves and our future that we need to figure it out, right? And therefore, yeah, globalization per se was the right approach. And what I'm seeing right now, the deglobalization, what is happening is it is a catastrophe. Right? Because the decoupling works against the right thing. Globalization was the right thing to do. And therefore, I think all the leaders need to work hard to keep the flow open and to engage in completely different, very comprehensive approaches, because ultimately we cannot survive in an island in America or in Europe if the global planet is falling apart. We cannot survive, because ultimately this will lead to war, it will lead to ongoing crisis, and we will pay for it. So, and therefore, I think we need to fundamentally change, right, our thinking. The wealthiest countries of the world, they need to find a solution, right, on a global basis. And all this, right, getting back to nationalism is the worst thing what we can do.
You're almost saying the people that are losers today in the system of capitalism because they have not managed to increase their prosperity, the losers ultimately will be the richest countries, because there is no stopping the flow of people, knowledge, information across these boundaries, but people. And so ultimately we will find that the problems come to those that are the winners right now, and we will all be losers. Is that correct?
That is correct, right? You are a great thinker, and therefore you are spot on, right? And at the end of the day, what I think is we need to talk more about it. We need to talk about, is it enough to have a shareholder value paradigm, right? We used to live in I was educated in shareholder value paradigm, right? At Goldman's, at Bain, at McKinsey. It was everything was great and it helped a lot. And over the last couple of years, we started to say, oh, maybe we need to ensure survival of the shareholder value paradigm. And so we added, smartly enough, a little bit ESG into it, right? In order to make the shareholder value paradigm look a little better in the perception of others. But at the end of the day, that's not enough, right? That's not enough. We need to think about a very integrated approach, finally, of financial capital, human capital, social capital, and natural capital, right? And if I were in a position or as a president or chancellor, I would fund, right, millions, right, for those, the best scientists and the best leaders of the world, right, in order, what is the next way, what is the next paradigm after the shareholder value paradigm, right? And it needs to be different, because at the end of the day, I'm completely convinced money makes the world go around. And so we need to find a solution for those who held the money, that they understand that short-term orientated optimization of money will ultimately destroy destroy shareholder value, right? And therefore, that is a completely new shift in thinking, right? And I think we have to go this route, and it can only come from those who understand the system best, including you and maybe even myself.
So people like us need to wake up. Your message is so clear. And it's interesting that you say that as somebody who heads one of the biggest stock exchanges in the world, right? You're saying you see all these enormous flows of capital, and you see the winners and losers of the past system and how it plays out today, but that system itself is under threat if it doesn't change to deliver to everybody. And I think you say it from a point of compassion as well as pragmatic, rational thinking. What is the form of the system of capitalism that you see needs to evolve? You're asking for people who are in the system to realize it isn't working and to re-architect it in some form. Do you have a notion of where that leads?
Quite frankly, that is why I said we need to ask the smartest people to work on it, because it needs to be coherent, right? What we currently do, if you look into the shareholder value system, sorry for getting it a little bit technical. In the shareholder value system, right? You at the end of the day, yeah, you have this formula and the cost of capital, right, is the key driver. And you look and at the end of the day, risks are being reflected within cost of capital. And what you see, right, in the last and what we have experienced over the last years, when we had zero interest rates or even negative interest rates, right? We had seen that the interest rate as such was so dominant that nobody cared about the risk. Everybody knew risks were there, but since the liquidity was so high, the cost of capital were nevertheless extremely low. Now, yeah, and that is very fascinating to see. Now the cost of capital are exploding, not because of the risk, they're exploding because of interest rates, right? Yes. And they need to explode because of risk and inflation or interest rates. And that is the situation. Therefore, I think from my point of view, in the cost of capital, social capital, natural capital, and human capital needs to be reflected with a beta, theta, or whatever it is, stronger into the model of the shareholder value paradigm, in order to reflect, right, to reflect higher risks in the interest rate model.
Theodor, I'm fascinated because here you are, the CEO of a Borse, and you are questioning the very fundamental model of shareholder capitalism that has created the stock exchanges of the world and seen all the flow of money through it. And you're saying it can be strengthened if it includes other forms of capital, which are social and national and so on. You're saying ESG is not enough. It's the beginning maybe, but it's not enough at all. We actually have to fundamentally change how we measure value and how we account for risk. And if it isn't broader, then we face a almost cataclysmic crisis. And you're saying the crisis we're in today is much more profound than the one we were in 2008, which shook the whole world. And even though we might have financial structures that so far have survived, you're pointing to a clash between two great powers. And even the Ukraine war, of course, is smashing the energy system and the supply chains and so on. And so the changes we are facing are very profound. And you ask for a group of stakeholders, I guess, to come together to redesign the system. Where should they come from? Are these financial players? Are they government? Are they members of society and their representatives? I mean, is it across countries? What do you think is required? How fundamental?
Yeah, it is very fundamental. At the end of the day, politicians are not good in developing best solutions. Politicians are good in developing, right, in achieving majorities and achieving compromises. But we are now in a situation where you need to have expert teams, right? The smartest guys of the world, which need to work together in a sheltered atmosphere. They need to come up with a set of recommendations, right? It needs to come. The whole thing needs to come from the wealthiest nations of the world, and the job to be performed is, right, we need to come to a system which is longer term orientated, and which is more comprehensive, right? Not just within the sandbox, right? So I think at the end of the day, there's so much money out there, right? I think the guys who sit on the money today, right? The guys, the biggest accumulators of money, they should, in my perspective, they should apply an approach like Bill Gates and others, right? They should sit together and should say, what does it take? What is the next level of system where at the end of the day, the financial system will help the global system to survive? I'm completely convinced the only chance for us to survive is technology. And in order to finance technology the right way, you need financing capacity, and financing capacity needs to get newly allocated with a new method. Everybody of us, including myself, we understand it doesn't feel good, right? If I want to have grandchildren, they will judge me, that's for sure, by what we are leaving them, right? Not by the money, what we are inheriting them. That is gone within nanoseconds if crises like the crisis we see today are ongoing for the next 5 years. And therefore, it's no way that you can preserve future generations with a little bit money you're making today, and you leave them behind. I think that's the wrong mindset.
Theodor, I'm going to draw this to a close. You've highlighted some enormous issues. I think you've spoken about ESG and how it is not enough. You've spoken about the need to level up the world and share the value. But you've spoken fundamentally about changing how we measure value. You've spoken about the need for the rich nations to come together and realize that they need to change the system so it's far more equitable. You've spoken about countries that are losers and laggards in today's system and how we can't afford that to happen. And you've ended on a very personal note about the fact that we all have children and grandchildren to leave something better to, and that we're failing. And I think knowing you well enough to know that you say this with your values coming through, but also as somebody who has had CEO positions in the finance industry, but today seeing the data and the money flow through the world, you have a perspective that says this can't last. And we're in a crisis almost of great crises now, facing big change. And there's a question as to whether we can rise to make these changes happen, given that some of the world are winners as countries and as individual players, of course, but as countries, and others are not. A final word from you, please, before we wrap up, because I thank you very much for speaking so frankly about such a big topic.
I think I can only reiterate, we have as senior leaders, and especially those who are sitting in the financial service system or in the technology competitive arena, we have to think by ourselves hard, and we need to structure it through, and we need to think to the end. We need to voice ourselves increasingly. We need to start to listen to younger people, and we need to influence them on the other side as well. And we need to stress the fact that only those can create a solution who are currently sitting in positions of power. If not, the power will ultimately be taken away. And the last word, we have talked a lot about a crisis and so forth, and black swans, right? And I can only tell you, right, I'm long enough in business to know that sometimes there's a white swan coming across, right, which will help us to make things easier. But the likelihood for black swans and white swans currently is unfortunately to the black ones.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's a positive thought, but with a warning attached. Thank you very much, Theodor. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you very much, Kat. And yeah, I should have interviewed you. You are much smarter than I am. Thank you.
Not at all.
Bye-bye.
Not at all, my friend. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.